Greetings, everyone. Here we are, eating another piece of Advent calendar chocolate, and we're here to doodle for a little bit, filling up this last page of this sketchbook. Today we're just filling, with shapes or whatever we feel like, basically. And the point is just doing an exercise for the mind. So right now, I'm doing kind of like, I don't know if this is a carpet. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. Just throwing in things. It's just filling space. If an idea pops out, that's fine. We'll just put it in there. Right now I'm just making some scales. Could be for fish, could be for whatever. If that's what we want it to be. Doesn't have to be, though. Now I'm putting little dots in it. Could be like, well, let's see. Could be like little eyes too, I suppose. The purpose right now is just finding things. Inside of our brains and just emptying them out. They don't have to go anywhere in particular. I can recall lots of moments when my mother would be on the phone. You know, one of those wall-mounted phones. What strange technology that was. She'd be talking to someone with a pen in her hand, and then would just start doodling. So sometimes you'd see like a little face that might appear for a moment, or what could be a face, who knows what it was. And then all of a sudden it would just turn into just squiggly lines. I always found that kind of stuff interesting. The squiggly lines. Don't worry, we'll do some more purposeful drawings in a moment. Because somewhere inside there, there are things, like maybe we'll invent an animal. That'd be interesting. That just popped into my head now. So what if this creature had an eye? Or could it be a fish that we're coming up with? I don't know. Let's see what it turns into. Based on what we know about what we've already seen in nature, well, what could this turn into? I guess we're just going to have to find out. Might find something kind of familiar in a moment. Maybe. See it kind of being a bird-like thing. Sometimes what happens is you kind of can see a face that kind of pops out sometimes too, and I think that happens sometimes when you're in a room and you're unfamiliar with where you are. And sometimes you can see a face that just kind of pops up, and you wonder if you're perhaps not alone where you are. That can happen. I think that's called pareidolia, something like that. If you're making up faces where there are no faces at all. Perhaps I will look that up. Something that's fun to do is to sketch with a reference, but not to do it exactly as you see it. And it's fun to do things exactly as you see it too. I don't have any references for whatever this is. But I didn't know it was going to turn into this. That's interesting. We got some kind of a bird. Interesting. It's kind of a raven, except for the crownish thing that's going on here at the head. It seems a little more parrot-like than anything else. But we can kind of work it around a little bit. Whereas if we want, we could have something move forward, like the wing, if we wanted to. Birds are such interesting creatures. They learn from humans where food might be, where land might be, and we learn from them comparable things. So if you're at sea and you see a seagull, or any bird really, birds don't like to be afloat forever. They want to be somewhere where they can land. So it's usually a good sign if you're on a boat and there are birds nearby, although birds can fly for many, many miles. But yes, chances are land is near. Anyway, that's where that kind of popped out. Let us try something else. What if we purposefully work on an alien kind of eye, followed up by another eye. But of a humanoid, something that has two eyes, but adapted to a different kind of atmosphere. Unnecessary nasal cavities, maybe? I'm trying to think of bone structures as well. Does it need to speak? Is that necessary? Or is it telepathy? Sometimes we like to think of things out there that have certain intelligences, non-human intelligences, but we still give them features that are familiar to us. So sometimes you might hear of something that might look like a jellyfish, or might look like, let's say, a squid or an octopus. But being exceptionally intelligent, is that necessary for us to think that they would be like how we would look? We're under the impression that because the majority of us agree that there may not be other life that has our capacity for intelligence. Because we all haven't hung out with beings like that. And yet you hear stories of people who say that they have. That seems interesting to me. Now, would I welcome that? Would I want to hang out? I suppose it's all about intention, isn't it? No one wants to be probed for information. You'd kind of like it to be an exchange where, you're willingly sharing information instead of having it extracted. Plus, we'd like the ability to read languages as well, like body language. So the hope is that a smile could mean something, or a nod would mean yes. Those kind of things, those are universal kind of languages. Certain types of kindness or gestures is what I think a lot of us hope for when encountering a stranger. I think that's what we want. Have any of you ever drawn on a building or a wall, with permission, of course? Sometimes you see things on trains, and sometimes they're actually done by commission. Now, I'm a fan of seeing artwork. I'm not always a fan of seeing things left out and then somebody else will come along and graffiti it, and it's done in such a way that it's just crude. Sometimes you can tell that somebody went out of their way to do this in secret. And I find that to be kind of despicable, weirdly enough. As much as I like seeing artwork, I'm not a fan of seeing people destroy property with things like tags, which is sort of like a stylized way of writing, especially doing like signatures and whatnot. But there are things that you see in that world that are phenomenal. You might have heard of an artist named Banksy. And what sometimes happens in that case is that you get kind of a notoriety, and and it loses something after a while. I kind of like the face of this. But let's put some kind of party hat, maybe. How many of you remember cartoons or fun little shows where you'd see like somebody with a beanie, and on top of their beanie be like a propeller? Is that something from Leave It to Beaver, or what was that from? Do any of you remember that kind of stuff? Like, what was that about? What was the propeller about? A strange thing. I think it had some kind of like, yeah. Separated with colors. So yeah, I don't remember if that was like from a TV show. Oh, now I kind of remember. Didn't the Jetsons' son have a hat like that? I'll have to look that up too. I feel like that's a possibility. The Jetsons took place in the future. So I'm trying to remember exactly when that was supposed to take place. So I think it came out in the 1960s. And maybe 2562 or 62. Let me think. I think they went hundreds of years into the future. So maybe 23. Yeah, I don't remember right off. It wasn't 2062, I don't think. I think it might have even gone further into the future than that. I feel like there was a possibility that when they were designing things for the future in that show, they seem to be more about not really having tons of privacy. Like whatever the advanced thing that they were, they would have like open concept, minimalistic houses with a robot, and maybe, just maybe, there was clear glass everywhere. And you'd have like cool, awesome vehicles with dome roofs, which aren't really practical unless somehow you can block out sunlight and whatnot too. And I hope everyone in the future understood that they all needed seatbelts when they were flying around in the sky. Wheels were more about landing gear, weren't they? Because they didn't need to drive on roads. Everyone lived in the sky. In the 70s, you kind of started to see cars lose those giant wings that were popular on vehicles after the Second World War. So in the 50s and the 60s, oh yeah, people love the big chrome wings and things that reminded them of jets in the future. And so there in the background, you have some Jetsons flying by. I wonder if they thought about things like that. So there was a point in sky travel where they seemed to be looking towards very specific advancements. And luxury. And I think from that time period, they were like, oh, well, people want to get around, seeing neat things. And they came up with blimps. And blimps could actually move around at a pretty decent speed. And much like what the Jetsons would have had, where, you'd be in the sky all the time, it seemed like that was air travel that was the future. Zeppelins, I believe, is what they were called. And then most famously, they were kind of driven out of business because of one incident that naturally would not have happened. It doesn't make sense that, I think even to this day, we think about hydrogen as being fairly dangerous. But I somehow think that hydrogen would be far safer than giving people fast-moving vehicles under their own control, close to the road, close to other people. I think the Zeppelin would have been a far safer thing. And what remains of the air travel kind of movement now are like, well, hot air balloons. You can go to places where you can get on board one of these things and you hop in like a basket, they call it. And there is a pilot, they call them. And that person has this burner but they're kind of aimless. I mean, I think they kind of control certain aspects of them, but I think for the most part it's like wherever the wind kind of takes you. But yeah, the Hindenburg is what I was rambling on about with the Zeppelins. So one of them famously caught fire, and it was an extraordinary thing because it was also captured on film. And it wasn't until sometime later did we find out that there were great plans for these things all over Europe and North America to be able to dock at buildings, like skyscrapers basically. Not that I'm into conspiracy, but it makes you wonder if certain industries just didn't want these things, and it was maybe sabotage that really caused it to burn or explode. But of that industry, though, we still have cruise ships. People get on board cruise ships to this day. And that seems interesting to me. But I think the main difference, though, with cruise ships is that they run on fossil fuels. Whereas the Zeppelins only partially did. I think they used some electricity as well for their time. I think overall, for what we would have had information about as far as tragedies going, the Titanic was a far worse thing. Man, it would have been neat to be on an airship, just zipping around. People don't really deal with trains anymore, not the same as they used to. Of course, air travel in general now, people are only really interested in getting there as quickly as possible. Only the super wealthy seem to be interested in luxury travel like that on airplanes, where they could just fall asleep. It's kind of an unusual thing. I've seen cruise ships. Never been on a cruise. Going back to the concept of the blimps, now you just sort of see them as like the Goodyear blimp, for example. And it's such a novelty that I think people don't really look at them with much, like, they don't think about the Hindenburg, or they think of them as being over like stadiums now. I wonder if anyone would ever or could ever bring back that concept. Because these, unlike those, these were steerable. You could point them in certain directions. Even on certain windy days, because of their shape, they wouldn't just, yeah, I think they were better controlled. I mean, you wouldn't really want to be on one in the middle of a hurricane. That would not be fun. That's unusual to think about. Now, moments ago, when I started just doing this, I was like, oh, I think I'm going to draw a train. Somehow that shifted. I'm not sure what that's supposed to be. I mean, I guess I could still turn it into a train somehow. I guess I could turn it to a clock too if I really wanted it to. Now it's funny, when you think of modern day trains, they're not constructed the same way as those old iron super horses. Because you don't picture this on a modern train. Modern trains are not really, it's like they didn't really think that they needed to push snow, so they'd have their own sort of, there'd be something else that would clear the tracks for that modern train. Many trains now are just kind of built for speed. I don't know if this still should turn into a train or not. Because it's certainly not looking like one. Some places no longer keep railroads. They've converted their railroads into walking trails. And I think that's kind of too bad. So, of all the technologies that we have in the world, the one that we really haven't changed much of is steam power. We just generate steam in different ways. So we still have coal plants in the world. That still exists. These steam engines eventually kind of turned into diesel engines. But even still, they often operated the same way as steam engines. Even nuclear power plants are kind of like steam plants. Somebody somewhere is generating power through turbines. Anyway, it's just an interesting thing to think about, how steam, we really haven't moved much further than that. Just different ways. Nuclear power, we burn to move pistons. Yeah, this is unusual that I'm doing this. The locomotives. And on the inside, you would have an engineer. Or somebody that looked after the engine. It's unusual, don't you think? That moniker, that name to call the person who operates the train an engineer. Towns were built on ports. You needed to be close to where you could ship things. And the further inland you went, you had to figure out, well, how do we ship things inland? And so trains became the next thing that helped to build nations, basically. So you needed to be able to move heavy things from one place to another. So stagecoach, maybe this was a light. That should have been smaller. But I picture some of these things having a small bell as well, so you don't just have that whistle. And one of the more important parts here sure I'm getting some part of this wrong. Oop. Dip this pen again. The means by which to get the smoke out. So to this day, they are constantly working on designs of whether or not we need to keep the train going. And for moving over land, moving heavy things over land, it is still quite possibly the best thing that we have. And it's too bad that we're getting rid of them for the most part. We rely heavily on transport trucks because train stations don't really exist in small towns anymore, which is kind of too bad. Anyway, I don't really remember how these things look anymore. Just guesswork. I know back here there'd be like a coal car or something like that, but they could go great distances. Just needed water. You'd have a place where you'd get water on the way by from a water tower or something like that. Anyway, so a couple of doodads in there of just silliness. I suppose at one point how people took care of moving great distances with things would be using a stagecoach or a caravan of animals. And I don't know if we've ever really found a creature on the planet that's much like a horse, as remarkable as that creature is as well, that just kind of works with human beings to move things around. And they're almost as novel as seeing, well, they're more common, but you know, as seeing a hot air balloon. What an amazing creature a horse is. So doodling and rambling. I don't know if we're going to do much more than that for the evening. We're just playing around. Let me think if there's any other idea for travel or whatnot. Let's go up here to the corner for a moment. I think there was more than a couple of people who was super interested in flight. And one of my least favorite stories is that of Icarus. but I'm not going to tell that story. But something that many people have been injured in is trying to create their own wings for flight. And I think it's strange to think about the concept of aerodynamics over the last, let's say, 150 years. They didn't always think about the concept of gliding first. So you'd see old film. So, while people were developing cameras, there were still people that thought they could flap their arms to flap wings. It's like, come up with a better glider first, folks. But yeah, flapping their arms. Like that was gonna, anyway. That didn't work out great for everybody. But gliding is the way to go. I mean, you'd think somebody came up with a paper airplane before they would have called it an airplane. You'd think so, right? Anyway, it's just a funny thought that they didn't have built into them the idea that maybe we should glide first. Well, interesting. I think that's it for now. I will add a little bit more to this. And I'm going to think about some other things that I can just sort of ramble on about and draw just for fun. But I think that's it for now. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and hopefully we'll see you at some point in the near future. All right, folks.